But we have a guest who is a very active, wonderful member of our community who seems to just know a lot about many things and has a big heart for the Bloomington community and the people who want justice and equality and all of that good stuff. And so I'm glad to have you here to share your expertise on this with us. So take it away. And just a reminder, I am recording this for people who might not be able to be here. She's the only one on screen. But if you do have a question or a comment, please speak about as loudly as I am so that the microphone can pick up your comment. Great.
I'll try to do the same. Yes, hello, people on screen. So hello, and thank you so much, Pastor Siri, for the invitation and for this opportunity to be here. I've been familiar with your congregation for a while. We've done some organizing together off and on over the years. My name is Dr. Karen Wills. I am a faith leader for the Unitarians across Minnesota, and I'm have just recently moved into the position with our organization called the Minnesota Unitarian Universalist Social Justice Alliance. My new position is called Democracy Strategist, right? Which sounds cooler than it is. But I was the executive director of that organization, joyfully hired a magnificent right-hand person, Katie Klein, about 3 years ago, who now is the new executive director, because that's how you do it, right? It's all about, kind of boosting leadership and moving people along. And so what I wanted to share about a bit today is two things, really. The specific example that I'm looking to kind of bring forward to you as an instance of coalition-based community organizing and faith-based community organizing is a group that I've been with for about 3 years now called the North Star Alliance, which is siding with and advocating with, not advocating for, advocating with immigrant-led, immigrant-serving organizations, faith-based organizations, an emerging cadre of business and labor organizing. And what we're doing now, sort of unfortunately, is pushing back against a rising wave of anti-immigrant hate in Minnesota. We have people who are using mythology, threat, and fear, the kind of disinformation that your amazing pastor was just speaking about, right, in that beautiful sermon this morning. What the coalition has built, and we're now about almost 4 dozen organizations altogether, is the beginning of what I think of as the wall of willows, right? There's an old adage that one willow bends with the wind and has deep roots and survives and spreads under the soil, and a wall of willows grows, and that wall of willows holds back the wind. That is what coalition building, that is what faith-based, community-based organizing does. It creates that wall of willows, it creates those connections among us and between us to hold back winds of fear and disinformation and hatred of folks who might speak a different language from me, who might have a different skin color than me, who might come from Mexico as undocumented immigrants instead of coming from Canada and Scotland as undocumented immigrants like my people did. Right? What I'm seeing is that y'all, Elka Lutherans are phenomenal. I mean, you all are just amazing. And when I went online to do a little bit more research and learn a little bit more about just exactly what was happening in Elka world right now, what I learned is that LutheranAdvocatesMinnesota.org, right, your statewide organizing body, is advocating for pretty much the same stuff that my statewide organizing body is advocating for, and that is that wall of willows, right? That's how we build it. The other thing that I saw is an absolutely gorgeous photograph of y'all having packed, I can't even remember how many bags of food with Feed My Starving Children, right? This congregation has been about feeding people. It's been about fighting hunger, obviously, for a really long time, and that's one of the things that a lot of y'all are really into and pushing back against, showing up in those spaces to fight hunger in Minnesota, right, which we all know, you know, is at Normandale Community College and in our high schools and in our community, there are people who are hungry. I was unemployed for a little while when I left Children's Hospital and before I was hired by the organization that I work with now. I had a year of being unemployed and I learned about Veep. I learned about the food bank, right, that you all donate to and volunteer for and support. That kind of charity helped me and my family to have good food. Now, I'm a pediatric psychologist. I had a good income for a very long time. I had all the spices from Penzies that I needed to cook that food. I had a kitchen, I had pots, I had learned how to cook a variety of things. I knew what Brussels sprouts on the stalk were and how to prepare them, right? Because they're amazing. So when I went to Veep and I saw all those leftovers from Trader Joe and I was buying my Brussels sprouts and my sweet potatoes and my lamb, I'm like, yes, you know, these are really good foods. And I also realized that if I were someone living in a hotel with a microwave, there was precious little on the shelves at Veep that I could have prepared that would have been a healthy, tasty, lovely meal for my family. So I learned about both the limitations and the blessings of being able to access the food bank. And one of the things that I started thinking about more than I had before in those years back in 2018 was that in order to really serve in the way that I think we as congregational faith-based people are capable of serving, right? To take it to the next level. One of the things that became a mission in my bones at that point, a mission in my belly because I was eating from Veep, is to understand that when we're doing social justice in a faith-based space, that is going to call us not only to charity, right? Not only to show up and donate and pack food and feed people. That charity, that service element is critically important. It fed me, and I thank Veep for that, and I thank all of you who support Veep, and I do too, right? It's essential. But there are two other pieces that we're building towards that strengthen that. When we are packing food and feeding people and donating to the food bank, we're working within the system of hunger and poverty, but we're not working to change the system of hunger and poverty, right? It's like we can buy that extra sack of groceries at Festival Foods, and that is a good thing, but it doesn't change the fact that people are starving in Bloomington, and we know that. So the layer on of the other two pieces that we think about, in addition to charity, we think about solidarity, talking with and listening to and hanging with people who are insecurely housed, people who are hungry, listening to what they need, right? What are the kinds of foods that we need to be bringing to VEEP? What are the kinds of layers that we need to build on, as VEEP has been doing very successfully, to move towards providing space for people to prepare foods, right? And I don't know if any of you were part of this, but during the pandemic, and during the time that I was still getting food from VEEP, I learned that because I was with a faith-based organization, I was able to actually get additional boxes of food, and at a time when Loaves and Fishes was kind of shutting down, because of the COVID scare, and they couldn't gather in large numbers, we were able to start farming out boxes of food to individual households who were cooking stuff, and then we would bring prepared meals over to the hotels where people were being housed. And that kind of, so you can always do that sort of, there's always a workaround, there's always some kind of organizing. But as a way to be able to work within that system of feeding people, but then we took that same cadre of people that were doing some charity, that were in solidarity with folks here, and the third layer was advocacy. There is every single year a day on the Hill for Hunger Minnesota, and for Beacon Affordable Housing, and for the Joint Religious Legislative Coalition. And I imagine some of you might have been to that, or might have hopped on Zoom and talked with your own representatives and your own legislators about making laws in Minnesota that actually support the efforts to push back hunger, and to make sure, for example, a big one that was passed last year, free school lunches across the entire state. So that little provision that happened for a stretch in some districts became statewide to Minnesota. So Minnesota, in many ways, has become a refuge state for folks who are facing discrimination and oppression and hunger and homelessness across the region. We've got a ways to go. We're so far from perfect, but it's a matter of kind of like moving forward. The North, so let me stop for a sec. Questions, comments? Anybody? Has anybody here ever been to a Day on the Hill? Have you, or has anybody here ever spoken to your own legislators? Melissa Wicklund, Nathan Coulter, other people. Some of y'all have, and some of you haven't had the chance to do that yet. And when we come forward with that, justice with joy, being able to join as a body and do that work, there are, from a place of shared values, we may not share 100% of our values. There may be things that I'm about that you're not about, and that is fine. We do not have to think alike to love alike. And we can go in. I don't think probably anybody in this room is like, yay poverty, yay hunger, yay homelessness, right? That's not a thing. That's not a thing with people of faith. And so one of the things to know about is that here in Minnesota, we are unusual. We have in Minnesota a firm foundation of multi-faith, interfaith, welcoming organizing. And there are a number of groups that do that. One of the groups that I've organized with for, probably like 20-some years is called the Joint Religious Legislative Coalition, JRLC. And I can send you, this is not a space where slides really work well, but I can send those, some slides that have these contact information if that would be useful, if that's something you have opportunity to share. So JRLC is one group that is made of the four major Abrahamic religions, right? It's the Catholics, Minnesota Council of Churches, which is all the Protestant congregations, including Alka congregations, the Jewish Community Relations, so all of the Jewish people, major organization, and then the Muslim Association. So those four major Abrahamic religions, the leaders of them get together and they decide on a shared coalition set of legislative priorities every year. And they have a day at the Hill where you can, hop on a Zoom feed from your own congregation, get a little group together, get on the computer, or you can actually physically join together with people from other churches. Darul Farouk, the Unitarians, Oak Grove Presbyterian, right? A lot of other churches have representatives in their congregations that will join together as a group. Everybody from Senate District 51, if you live in this area, right? Or any neighboring Senate district. You go as a group with a multi-faith, team, and they train you and give you handouts and talk with you about, kind of how it works. And you have a coach, somebody like me that's done this 14 million times, and goes and actually talks with your legislators about making rules in Minnesota. And those legislative priorities typically are going to be about hunger, poverty, homelessness, affordable housing, right? Because those are things that, right, and this year actually there's a lot of mental health priorities as well. And I know that's another thing that your congregation has really been behind. So that's a way to just take the values that you hold in your hearts and amplify those and make some connections with your neighbors who are coming from other faiths but may have these shared values. Right? So JRLC is one of those. The Minnesota Multi-Faith Network is another multi-faith organization that represents many, many people. It also includes like the Buddhists and Sikh and Hindus and humanist Unitarians and a bunch of people that are not necessarily on the leadership teams of JRLC. So it's an even broader coalition, but they are not doing advocacy, they're doing welcoming. And they are all about sharing speakers and sharing forums and really trying to bring people together across these divides of culture and religion and origin and language that are being used right now to dehumanize and demonize people, right? And so part of that is just Minnesota Multi-Faith Network is a way of communicating and building understanding, not trying to convert anybody to anything, but trying to see the divinity and the humanity and the love in every other person's eyes, right? Including people who look very different. So those are just two examples. Isaiah is another one that can be a little bit tricky because they have a clergy network that similarly is trying to build across divides. The Faith in Minnesota network is more explicitly kind of a liberal, progressive kind of organization that is supporting particular candidates and parties. And for my organization as a nonpartisan, values-based group, that territory can be a little bit tricky. But there's a lot that we can do in our congregations. So, specifically the North Star Alliance, what I wanted to share with y'all is that one of the biggest things this year is, and actually, I think what happens is when you share handouts, everybody starts reading the handout. So you're going to hold off on this for just a second. I'm going to leave you with a handout and also with some postcards that I am happy to either have you mail or I think these ones I'll just have to leave with you. The North Star Alliance, the North Star Act, is a bill that we introduced and worked on now, about 5 years. It was carried by Senator Patricia Torres Ray, who has now resigned from the Senate, and it was carried this year by Sandra Feist in the House, who is an immigration attorney, and by Senator Omar Fateh. And the two of them brought the bill forward. The idea of the North Star Act is to create an environment within Minnesota that resists racial ethnic profiling of good neighbors. So the idea is that when people have not done any harm. They have not sort of committed a crime here in Minnesota or hurt anybody or, stolen anything. That they should not be proactively profiled by local government agencies such as clinics and shelters and schools and traffic cops. And their immigration status should be private information that those government agencies don't go after in order to detain and deport them, right? So there's nothing about that bill that in any way prevents the investigation and prosecution of crime. But what it does do, for example, would be to protect local police departments, which are not trained to understand immigration laws. It would protect a local police department from stopping a CEO of Medtronics up in Ely and saying, I need you to show me your papers. Oh, you don't have papers? Well, you're driving without a license? You're probably illegal. So let me lock you up in my Ely jail for 3 or 4 days over the weekend until I can reach federal immigration agents and get you deported, because we don't like your kind here. Yeah, I'm not slamming Ely, it's just an example. That is something that has happened. It has happened multiple times across Minnesota. It doesn't tend to happen as much in Hennepin County because we already have an ordinance in Hennepin County that our police don't do that, right? Because they are not trained federal agents to understand the difference between someone who's already applied for asylum or someone who's here on a student visa or someone who's here on an H-1 visa as a CEO of Target or Medtronics, which are shooting for 25% Spanish-speaking leadership by 2030 because Mexico is their largest trading partner, right? So it costs money for local police, and there are many local police and sheriffs who don't want to have this kind of profiling and collecting information about people's immigration status in order to report and deport. It's not good for law enforcement, and it certainly is not good for schools. You sign up your kid for youth soccer, you need to be able to do that without thinking that the youth soccer registration is going to result in your uncle being deported. Right? What's happening, the reason why this bill is so critical, even though we already have the regulation in the city of Minneapolis, city of Bloomington, city of St. Paul, most of Hennepin County, right, is relatively safe space. We are not harassing and profiling our neighbors who might appear to be recent immigrants in this area very much because they've figured out that's a really bad idea. It's also a very bad idea because what happens is that if my sister is being beat up by her husband, am I going to call 911? If I see my neighbor being burgled, am I going to call 911 if I think that that call is going to result in my husband, who still is seeking asylum, being deported? I am not, right? So all of our communities get safer when people feel safe with law enforcement. And that's the other purpose of this bill. So that's the point and the reason for bringing the North Star Act forward as a statewide law. Doesn't change anything about immigration policy at the border. It doesn't change anything about what federal ICE agents can do, Immigration Customs Enforcement, people who come and arrest and deport folks who are here without papers. And we know that the immigration system is badly, badly broken. People can come without papers, apply for asylum, and be here for literally 25 years waiting for their cases to get processed because it's such a mess. But so the North Star Act is being brought forward and is being supported by this major multi-faith coalition, and we became the lightning rod this year for people who are choosing to dehumanize and demonize undocumented workers, even though they're bathing your grandma and picking your grapes and fixing your food in the restaurant and being CEO of Target. That demonization is just drummed up by folks. We have one political candidate who literally said, those people are a poison in the blood of America. Those people. And it's using phrases. We have some politicians using phrases like they are vermin, they are an infestation, they are invading our communities, right? I don't talk about people like that, right? I don't even talk about the people who are talking like that. That's just not any kind of Christian I've ever heard. So what we're looking at, and I know we're kind of about out of time.
Well, not quite. I was just
Yeah.
wondering if there are questions that you would be open to jumping off of.
Yep, perfect.
Because I have
Thank
couple.
you.
I have some questions.
Yeah.
I'd be willing ask if you'd be willing to share about. Can you clarify exactly the umbrella? Because when you say undocumented, I think that's a scare word. And I think a lot of us don't actually know what that means. That might be an umbrella term.
Yes.
For different statuses, and that there's different kinds of status.
Yeah.
For example, some of you who were at the Wednesday night services, you heard my dad talking about how he sponsored a family to come over. They're documented. They went through a very, very particular program so they could be here for 2 years exactly to do work. So that was a very particular program. But if you would just want to share a little bit more about that, and then your experience, because you talked about like misinformation. And I would just love for you to just name for us exactly what are the lies that we're being told about immigrant communities in Bloomington. And I think some of you, we might know some of them, but I would just love to hear you tell us.
Yeah, sure. No, very. So when we talk about, when you hear that word undocumented or unauthorized immigration, it's a huge umbrella. So there are people who have come here, who've come from another country to the U.S. as students on a student visa, and while they were here in school, war broke out in their country, in Sudan or in the Middle East, or major violence broke out in places like Venezuela, Honduras, and other, So we have people who are here as students or as temporary workers, folks who come in because the lodges up north, can't get enough staff locally. There aren't enough young people to staff those lodges, or the nursing homes need to hire people, so they get permission to bring folks in, or agriculture, or all of the packing plants, right? We have a lot of industries in Minnesota that employ people from around the world. So if someone comes in, war has broken out in their country, or there are dangers to them in their country, they may stay longer than their official visa says that they're allowed to be here. That's actually super common. There are people who are fleeing violence, or starvation, or drought, also caused by climate change and by the U.S. importing guns to their countries. But that's another, So there are people who are fleeing those kinds of situations, in their own countries, and who are coming here seeking asylum, seeking refuge, seeking safety. and they apply and do the paperwork for that coming through the border. And it can take years and thousands of dollars for that paperwork to be processed. So we have a lot of people in Minnesota who are sort of in the system, but who have not yet cleared all of the barriers and done all the paperwork that they need to be able to become citizens of Minnesota, or what's called, its terrible name, it's resident aliens, right? My brother-in-law from Australia has been a resident alien in Minnesota for, 40 years. So, so there's paperwork that makes you official, and what that means is that if you, have a tail light out, or you get a traffic stop, if you are an official resident alien, you cannot be just put on a plane and deported back to whatever country you might have been born in, right? Let's see. So those are. And then and actually a third category that is very, very common in Minnesota is people who have immigrated here from like Liberia or Ecuador or certain countries that were officially designated as, countries where there was, unrest or war, some, kind of, I don't know, sort of the immigration administration at some point decided, yes, if you're from this country, you're allowed to legally come to the United States. But many of the people, like Liberia is a good example. People from Liberia are here on what's called temporary protected status. They have TPS, residency, and that is constantly in question, constantly in threat. It needs to. So you might, if you're from Liberia, you might have lived here in Minnesota, in Bloomington, for 20, 30 years. But with each new administration, or each new period when your temporary protected status expires, the U.S. Congress gets to decide whether or not you get to stay here, or whether you're going to become suddenly an illegal resident who can be arbitrarily deported back to Liberia, even though you might not have been there since you were 6 months old, or since your kid was 6 months old, who just now is, in their 30s. It's a very, very weird system. So that's kind of this umbrella. What we are hearing, it's hard to even. I just did repeat some of it. I think one of the most foul statements, because it was a phrase that was used literally by Hitler about the Jews in Germany during the Holocaust, is this phrase that about immigrants being, and I quote, a poison in the blood of America. Unbelievable. Unbelievable, particularly when you consider that pretty much everybody in America, except for folks who were enslaved people, right, brought here against their will. They were not immigrants. They were enslaved, kidnapped essentially and tortured. Enslaved people and indigenous people, are not immigrants, but pretty much all the rest of us, I don't know about you, but I am surely an immigrant. My family was, right? So, yeah.
Something that I've learned that I think is really helpful is when my ancestors came over, there wasn't anything, you just came over.
Yeah.
And then you signed your name.
Yeah,
so
you
there, this
signed.
process that we expect people to go through didn't exist. And so you just came in any way, and immediately you were a citizen. And then laws got put in place after that fact specifically, correct me if I'm wrong, specifically, who do we want to keep out? That was the intent of immigration laws, wasn't to create a process to make it easier, streamlined, or fair, or equal, but rather, who do we want to keep out? And then they would allow certain people to come in, but the laws got more and more and more and more to the point where now, immigration lawyers have a stack this big they have to go through that changes depending on administration. And it is oftentimes people who, they have to wait years and years and decades sometimes to get citizenship. And I think that there's some misinformation out there too, like that if you just marry someone, you'll automatically be granted citizenship. And that's, even though that's on TV shows, right? That's on TV shows of like the Canadian's gonna get married and instantly grant citizenship, but that's not true. And so I think that some of the sentiments I've heard of like get in line and do things the right way like my ancestors did, it was a different world. There's no comparison to, so I just wanted to bring that up because that's some of the things that I think we're ignorant of the history and how much it's changed and how hard it is now. And if anything else you want to say.
No, that's exactly it. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I mean, the other thing that is, one of the other sort of big lies that is being used as a scare tactic is the notion that somehow newer immigrants to Minnesota, and for some reason the targeting tends to be black and brown immigrants, right? People are talking about immigrants from Mexico or from North Africa as being the big danger. You don't tend to see or hear about people from Canada or Irish immigrants who are that for some reason that just doesn't have the same sort of oomph to it. But this notion that immigrants are bringing drugs into our country or are coming here and are dangerous criminals, or they're all parts of a gang, and all of this kind of thing is something else that we hear a lot about, and that is used sometimes pretty effectively to frighten suburban and rural white people for the most part, to be blunt about it. And the thing about that is that the fact is that newer immigrants are much less likely to commit any kind of crimes of violence or to be involved with drugs and with any kind of actual like criminal behavior, because they came here escaping that and came to this country to be able to create a life for themselves and their family that is safer and better. And so, is there any criminal that can be found who is there any immigrant who can be found who has ever committed a criminal act? Is it the case that there might be, somebody in that bunch, who has done something wrong, who gets showcased for political gain? You bet there is. I mean, obviously, immigrants are humans like the rest of us. But on average, if you look at who is actually committing crimes in the U.S. and, just not being good neighbors, it is not recent immigrants. It's far more likely to be people who've lived here for a very long time, right? So it's another piece of the disinformation that's out there, is to sort of just sort of characterize and stereotype people. And we're all aware that this is how stereotyping happens, right? You take one instance, you find the one example, no matter how much that's the exception to the rule, and you take that one example and just blow it up big and make it like, oh, those people are like this one person who did a wrong thing. So, I see people do that with Christians from time to time. Oh, Christians are intolerant Christians don't like gay people. Christians, blah, 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 right? And when I hear someone say that, I speak up. I'm like, no. I organize with Christians. I know a lot of, pardon my French, badass Christians. You know? And, so people of faith from many traditions can be so amazing and do not ever deserve to be stereotyped, and the same is true of newer immigrants. So,
Well, we just have a couple minutes left. Are there any other final questions for Karen?
I just wanted to point out that a lot of the bad actors who are coming into the country, along with the good immigrants, are coming into the country using the same channels that the good immigrants are trying to leverage to hasten their coming to America, because our system is just so messed up, and they're desperate to get out. Desperate to get their children out of these crime areas or whatever's going on, war-torn or whatever. And so if we were to find a way to streamline the system to allow them a safe way to come to America, we could potentially reduce the flood of immigrants trying to come in through these alternative channels that the bad actors are also leveraging.
Yeah. Yeah, trying to, we have had no administration ever, this is such a hot potato, that it almost, it's enough to give you whiplash to look at both sides of this coin all the time, right? So both sides of the coin. On the one side of the coin, we have not ever in the past 50 years had an administration that really tackled just immigration reform in the ways that would actually benefit all of our communities, right? Give us the essential workers and the good neighbors that we need, and give people the kind of dignity and safety that they need coming in, and screen out the bad actors, right? That doesn't exist. We do not have an immigration system that does that at a federal level. What we are seeing at this, so what's happening is that the states are taking it on themselves. Y'all have probably seen some of the news from Texas, right? It's terrifying. And what we're seeing is that even though no administration, not George Bush, not Obama, not Trump, not Biden even, have, kind of put together a package that is effective and successful around kind of shaping immigration reform. What we are looking at going forward is really frightening. It's really, really, really frightening. Because one of the things that is happening, one of the reasons that I've been pushing so hard for the North Star Act in Minnesota, and it will not pass here this year because it's too much of a hot potato. There's too much fear. So we didn't even get a hearing, never mind, a floor vote on that particular bill. I'm hoping that some pieces of it might still pass as parts of omnibus data privacy and school and public safety bills, but we'll see how that goes. But what is happening state by state is that if you look at recent laws in Iowa, Tennessee, Texas, and Arizona, and some other states around us, this is in play in Wisconsin right now, some of those legislators are going in the exact opposite, 180-degree opposite direction. And what they want to do is to require school districts, domestic violence shelters, health clinics, which calls me as a health provider, but and local sheriffs and local police for non-criminal, civil infractions like having a taillight out. They want to make a requirement that any time any government agency interacts with a human, they have to ask, show me your papers. Are you legal? Are you a citizen? And if you're not, we will proactively report you to federal immigration enforcers, and we can detain you. We can put you in our local Bloomington jail over there, right next door to the Art Center. We're going to put you in jail for a matter of several days until we can get a hold of the federal enforcers to make sure whether or not you are deportable. And if you're not, oh, too bad, so sad. It's the law that we have to ask you this and detain you because you kind of look Spanish or you look Caribbean, right? And that's the law that's being passed other places. That is, it's unimaginable. So kind of we're moving forward to not become a police state. And I'll just close by saying that my Unitarian, one of the things, I've just invested $5,000 of my own, credit card in a program. So the Unitarians across Minnesota, I'm about to go on the road. I sleep in the back of my Prius, and I'm going on the road the 1st of May around the state. 25 congregations from Bemidji to Winona. And my people, my Unitarians, we are going to be sending 175,000 postcards to young renters in rapidly diversifying districts of Minnesota to get out the vote in 2024. These are, they're friendly postcards that say, tell your friend about mnvotes.org. That's our Secretary of State website. We want to be good neighbors. Part of my faith group says we own our own bodies, and we will. We protect the planet. And here's how to vote, right? And so we're mailing those out to 335 buildings in places in Minnesota where the tipping point between anti-immigrant rhetoric and loving our neighbors is hanging on 600 votes or less. So I want those folks in apartments to really think about exercising their right to civic engagement. And they might not all vote the same way I will, but what we know is that when we all show up, we all get represented, and people in apartments don't tend to get that information. And so that's one strategy. I just want to encourage you that, the advocacy level, that next step beyond service, beyond charity, that next step involves connecting with the Bloomington League of Women Voters, a phenomenal group, right, that some of you probably already are connected with. So Bloomington League, doing candidate forums, doing voter outreach, knocking doors in apartments, Environmental Voters Project, Vote Forward, sending letters to Georgia, and Reclaim Our Vote. Those are all things that people can do in church because they are nonpartisan. They're outreach to low information voters around the country or around Minnesota. And that's another way. If we don't have people speaking for us, if we don't have voices that really believe in the divinity and humanity of all people, then we're going to have voices in our legislature, just like Texas and Iowa and Wisconsin and Tennessee, who don't believe that. And unfortunately, those are stark choices right now. So.
Thank you so much, and we'll give her a hand for all this information. I know we can